this short video on general tips, we're just going to go ahead and create a really simple Dorian progression. And actually, in truth, we really don't create progressions per se. And I've said this over and over many times. We use progressions that have already been used. And this, I'll use 3 Dorian chords, which are super common to use with Dorian with basic triadic music. And we're going to keep it simple with just basic triads. And you could use a progression like this with rock, pop, or even film scores, because a lot of modern film scores are actually fairly simple progressions. So first, let's just do a test. Just randomly playing the 3 chords I'm going to use. Doesn't really make much sense when I do it like that, because chord progressions by themselves don't make music. So let's just input these chords. It's the D minor, G, D minor, C major, G, D minor. We'll just keep doing this. This is our chord progression. Very typical chords to use with Dorian. Well, if we stop and listen back to this now, this is our chord progression. It doesn't sound very musical at all. I'll just hit play on this. So the problem, as I've always stated again, is not the chord progression, it's the timing. So let's create some timing around this chord progression, and we're going to, by again using the assistance of a rhythmic patch, and I did this in a previous video. This is only to teach yourself how to create timing. I don't personally do this, but I've found that it works really well with students who can't create chord progressions. So now I've used those 3 chords we talked about before in a way that makes sense. So now these 3 chords will make sense if we do it like that. So let's create the timing for this. We'll choose simple 4/4, and we'll just have really basic note values. In fact, we'll do exactly what I did by holding those chords like that. So let's input just on whole notes. Now let's switch to half notes for the C, then the G. Now we have a chord progression that'll make sense by adding some simple timing to this. Let's go ahead and play it back. Now you have something you can loop that's in Dorian. So we'll get rid of, well actually we'll just stick in a repeat here, because we now have a progression that can repeat in Dorian. Not the greatest thing in the world, but it works. Simply by creating a timing scheme. So now we're trimming it up, and we'll go ahead and add a lower end part to it if you want. Our eventual goal, though, is to drop this rhythmic patch and improvise on this. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose the root on the D, the G on the G, D. Now let's go downward to the C, and then downward to the G. Okay. Improvise or write around this. In this case, it's a short video, so I'll just improvise on it. I'm not going to write anything, but let's listen to our progression. Yeah, this is actually very, very common Dorian stuff, especially in film scores. You hear stuff like this all the time. And in fact, I could name Avatar, the original, the first one that James Horner did, actually uses the same chord progression. Uses, that's why we're talking about we don't invent chord progressions, we use them. Now let's just go ahead and improvise on it. drop the rhythmic patch. Now that's if you like synthetic patches. I'll just switch to a basic piano and do something similar. And again, just follow this scheme here. And you could just keep repeating something like that. You could make it more complex, add seventh chords, whatever. At this point, it's up to you what you do with it when it comes to creating a composition. So the whole point is just giving yourself some kind of starting point, some kind of basis with tools like this, creating some kind of rhythmic scheme that's going to work in repetition. At least until you're good enough to drop the tools like that and be able to either write something out in notation that'll make sense right away or improvise, whatever you prefer. I prefer notation myself, but a lot of people prefer to improvise in music straight into their DAW. So whatever your preference is. The whole point is that you could get progressions to work really easy if you use some kind of rhythmic patch, because it helps you create timing. And chord progressions by themselves are just a bunch of chords that run into each other. They don't have timing. And developing a basic sense of timing is actually really crucial to creating more complex music. And you could even reach a point where you start using odd times and odd meters and odd note groupings and whatnot, and it still makes musical sense.